Good morning, everybody. You've joined us on a rainbow ice day. Rainbow ice. Where is that from? That's from Fujian province, the Wuyi Mountains. So it's the so-called cliff tea. Has that rock bone flower association. So today we're going to focus on Wuyi Mountains. We're going to focus on some of the elements that make these teas so special. So by the end of this session, you'll understand a lot more about cliff teas. We haven't done cliff teas in what seems like ages. I wonder if I even remember how to talk to them. Whoops, about them. I still know how to talk to them since I drink them every day. All right. I'm going to only for a very short time talk about shop news, and then we'll jump right into Rainbow Ice. So this week, we further did some cleanup within the shop. We did some more ordering of tea, and we think we'll start to get some of that stuff probably late August, early September. So we're still on a path here to get more teas. We're still on a path to do more cleanup. We're still on a path to see whether a trip might be available next year. So all of those things are in play. We're very busy doing all of those things. That's the shop news for this week. Let's go to the Wuyi Mountains. What type of a place is that? It's a World Heritage Site. Let's start off with that. It's a place where Buddhists and Taoists and Confucianists, unlike other places where they frequently were at odds with each other and were unable to live in harmony, in the Wuyi Mountains, they lived in harmony. That should tell you instantly already that the Wuyi Mountains is a very special place. Let's think about what they look like. You've got 36 or 37 or 38 peaks. It's volcanic soil. So you have endogenous and exogenous forces at work. And they've been at work, how long? 80 million years. What are those endogenous forces? Uplift. The volcanic actions create that whole landscape. The exogenous, erosion. So this is very important. This has created the preconditions for this wonderful tea. What specifically creates the zones of wonder within the Wuyi Mountains? So we've talked about in the mountain before. We've talked about half in the mountain. We've talked beside the mountain and then way the heck out of the mountain. So we've already talked about those things before, but we haven't talked a lot about differences in how it looks. I mean, a mountain is a mountain, right? And the base is a base and the top is a top. Now let's think about that statement for a minute. Does the top of the mountain look like the base from a vegetation standpoint? The answer is no, not when you have real mountains. What makes the key difference? Well, in this area, in the Wuyi Mountains, it's the weather patterns along with the soil patterns. So let's first talk about the soil patterns. At the top of the mountain, in the areas that are in the mountain, you have a greater percentage of broken up rock along with soil. As you go down the mountain, as you descend the mountain and get out of that true mountain area, and that's a funny way to say it. outside of the so-called special growing area is a better way to say it, the soil composition changes. How does it change? There's fewer undivided rocks. In other words, it's more soil and less rock. And as you get further out, it's ooze, it's muddy, it's clayey, it's yellow. Oh, I didn't mention the color within the mountain. It's reddish. So therefore, what you have are different mineral elements, right? What does reddish indicate? Oxidation of the rocks. I'm sorry, oxidation of the iron in the rocks. So you've got some iron and some aluminum in those rocks. A bunch of other elements as well. As you go down the mountain, those rocks have deteriorated. So therefore, from a soil standpoint, you have differences. You have more acidic rocks within the mountain. Outside of that area, you have neutral and mud and ooze as you get lower down. So naturally, all of us as gardeners know that there's going to be a difference in the result when you grow things. You can grow the same thing in different soils and get different results. You should get different results because different nutrients are going into the plant. So this is very important to understand about the main difference within the mountain and outside of that area. There's another difference within the mountain and outside of within the mountain. And by the way, how big is that area again? 7.7 square kilometers. Got that out of the way. What's the other big difference? Well, when you go to the store, it's price. The stuff that you get from within the mountain here is very expensive. Why is that? It's very unique. Smaller quantity, 7.7 square kilometers. That's it. And what else is different? How about the microclimates? So the microclimates in this area within the mountain are smaller and more varied than when you start to leave this within the mountain area. They become more uniform as you get closer to out of the mountain. And that makes sense, right? Because think of Yosemite or any other mountain that you go and visit. You can be one place and then 2 miles away, the weather's slightly different, sometimes vastly different. Same thing in these mountains. Now, what are these mountains called? Oh, you thought that maybe I all of a sudden have Alzheimer's because I've used Wuyi Mountain to describe them. What I meant by that question, and no Alzheimer's, by the way, what I meant by that question was, what's the geological name of this area? And it's called Danxia, D-A-N-X-I-A. So again, that really describes a landform that has that uplift and has that erosion, characterized by broken up rocks at the top and less broken rocks at the bottom. So I described it to you first, now I give you a name. So whenever you talk to your friends, you can trot out this fancy name. It's not enough letters to be called really fancy, but it's a different enough name that almost nobody will know what you're talking about. So those are the main differences from what you can see of the landscape. How about the varietals? Are there different varietals of tea bushes and small tea trees in the Wuyi Mountains? There absolutely are. Were these things all hybridized? The answer would be no to that. So pre-1980, most of it was naturally, nature had taken its full form and created the different varietals, and man's using them. So this was a complicated way of saying what I'm about to make more clear. So naturally, within nature, nature forms its own hybrids, depending on the characteristics of the land and the soil and so forth. Man prefers some hybrids to others. So they pick away the ones they don't want and leave the ones they want. This was actually hybridizing. And so artificial selection. So you have nature selection and artificial selection. So that's what I mean by artificial selection. After the 1980s, after the 1970s, I should say, then there was this pickup in actual artificial, actual hybridization done at another level. It wasn't because you were selecting, you were creating new. Man was creating new varietals by mixing. So that's the history of how all these varietals got there. This area has been famous for a long time. So it's first written about and recorded in history during the Tang Dynasty. So 618 to 960 or so, you know, some other papers or some other definitions on that expert. I'm not talking about ChatGPT. I'm just talking about the internet expert. Say it really started in 606. Don't worry. Those numbers don't mean anything to us. We have the essence. It's between the 600 and the 900s that it gets recorded. The emperors during that time start to receive tea from this area. They start to love the tea. So I ask you this. Do you think, well, before I ask this question, let's talk about what type of tea was being sent to the emperor. Were they getting rock tea, cliff tea, oolong tea? Answer is they weren't getting oolong tea. We know this for sure because that process hadn't been invented yet. But they were getting tea from tea plants in this Dansha landform, right? Therefore, the minerality which you get in the cliff teas was somehow still coming through in the green tea, right? Maybe, not maybe, clearly not with the same intensity, but it was there. It was a special tea even before it became, in quotes, cliff tea. Cliff tea, Wulong tea, we remember, was invented probably in the late 1500s. The first official mention of it is in 1635. But you get a first mention, that means it's been going on for some time. And in terms of other styles of tea, we have to say it was one of the earliest. Is it absolutely the earliest? I can't say that with absolute conviction. But I can say 1635 is pretty early. Late 1500s, really early. And so this process, and we're going to talk about this process a little bit today, this very complicated process grew out of a prohibition. And this prohibition was first stated in 1368 and then restated in a very vociferous form in 1391. And basically, these were laws. We better not say laws. Let's call them edicts, imperial edicts, even stronger than law, which basically said, hey, no more tea cakes. Folks, we're going to do loose leaf tea only. And so you had that period between 1391 and then sometime in the 1500s where this process came to be invented. Now, I'm wondering if I looked through the historical records during that period, can I put my finger on the name of a person who invented the cliff tea process? The answer would be no. But I can put my finger on the institutions which led to that invention. Remember, I said this was a place where the temples of the Buddhists and the Taoists, the Confucianists, and in terms of, you might argue with me, well, were the Confucian buildings called temples? Maybe they weren't called temples, but it was the same thing. Centers existed in harmony in the Wuyi Mountains. Basically, the Buddhists and the Taoists developed this process. Why is it that they drove this process? They were experimenting with things. The Taoists in particular were looking for a long life elixir. And as such, they were using all these methodologies. Oh, maybe if I do this with the leaf, it'll produce long life. They were friendly with the Buddhists. The Buddhists also were experimenting, and they were experimenting in many parts of the country. And the thing about Buddhist and Taoist, did they just sprout up out of the temples and just kind of stay in the temples, hang out there all their lives, and do their meditation and their yoga and their praying and all this stuff at one temple? No, they traveled between series of temples and spread their knowledge. And that's how, even we believe, the initial process and the initial idea of doing something with the tea leaves occurred. It looks like it could have been from Anhui temples, because the Anhui temples were already experimenting with a frying process, and it looks like they were experimenting with that frying process in the 1500s. Was it earlier than in the Wuyi Mountains? We don't know. There's not enough evidence to tell us, but there is enough evidence to tell us that between the Buddhists in Anhui and the Buddhists in the Wuyi, there was communication. And these Buddhists were all talking about the various things they were doing with tea.
Were they also growing the tea, or do you think that there are the records to show that they were cultivating the tea as well as processing?
Great question. So the question is, were these Buddhists and Taoists also growing and cultivating the tea? The answer is yes. That's spot on. They were. They were in Anhui. They were in the Wuyi Mountains. This is what they did. When did they really start doing this? In the Buddhist tradition, we know for sure that in the 700s, in the Tang Dynasty, that they were already growing and cultivating in their temples or around their temples. Why? Because they'd already found by that time, the abbot gives an assignment. Okay, you gotta meditate on this subject. And don't let me catch you sleeping. You know, sleeping isn't meditating. Sleeping is sleeping. You close your eyes, but I'm gonna check to see whether your breath is the right rhythm. If the breath is sleep rhythm, I'm gonna whack you. So Buddhists had this sense that, you know, I can't fully slip into unconsciousness. I might be caught. Let me, or what is it that I can use to help me maintain consciousness? Well, it turns out that tea has caffeine in it, which helps stimulate you away from sleep. And so Buddhists use that. And how do I know specifically that this was the thought process? The Japanese Buddhists who went to China in 770, you know, they're all having these problems in Japan. You know, the abbot tells us to meditate. A few of us have really gotten to that level. We can meditate for 10 hours, zero problem, we don't fall asleep. But the rest of us are falling asleep. And they notice that the Chinese were not having this difficult. Why is that? Oh, you gotta have a little of this stuff. This stuff is really helpful for that. So it was already recorded at that time. They already knew that there was something about tea which helped them continue to be able to meditate and not fall asleep. Yes.
If, I'm not sure whether fasting is ever part of the tradition of the Buddhists at that, or the Taoists at that time, but then it makes me think that they would have still been permitted to drink tea during a fast, just a thought.
That's an interesting question.
I mean, further bolstering the essential fundamental role of.
I'm sure you're right. So the question is, Buddhist tradition has fasting in it. So when they fasted, would tea drinking have been permitted? And because they weren't eating the tea, but they were consuming, they weren't eating the leaves, is what I should say. They were consuming the liquid. You have to have water, even when you're fasting. And therefore, it makes sense that that was permitted. And everything that I've read, nothing contradicts that in terms of even current rules about fasting seem to indicate that that was okay. So yeah, great question though. All right, so we know that they're consuming, they're growing, they're cultivating, and they're experimenting, and they're communicating all over the country wherever there are temples. Hey, bro, we're doing this with our tea. Oh, we're doing this with our tea. And they're adapting at their various temples and seeing what might work with their tea. To this day, the Buddhist and Taoist temples still grow and cultivate in their temples. So that gives you, let's see how I'm doing. That gives you reason to pause and remind me that as you're sitting there, you would like something which could allow you to continue to meditate on these very interesting facts. So it is with very great pleasure that I bring in the tea master, and she will demonstrate how to brew rainbow ice, and then you'll brew along with her.
Hey, everybody. 早上好. Good morning. Yeah. 我做盐茶 I do Wulong tea. 我做盐茶 This is my, the today, so this is my favorite things I like it, so yeah. First, everybody understand, this 功夫茶 even larger I do 功夫茶 same this size.
So this is her setup and for today. And what she's indicating to you is she's using Kung Fu principles. Now, technically, when you're in the Wuyi Mountains, when you say Kung Fu, you're not using a large cup, but that's the only thing that isn't in line with what they do. Because there is a certain principle of how you make tea, which we still follow at this level.
但是我虽然大房，我虽然是大房，但是我也是手势是一样的方。
I just said that. All right, so she's heating the recipient pot. This is a clay pot, it's an Ishin pot. That's a tea toy, that's a small pot. And so she's heating it with 200-degree water. Ours is pre-programmed. You're going to use 200-degree water in the brewing of this. You want to make sure that the cup and everything has no residual flavors or influences. You only want the rainbow ice influence when you put the tea leaves in. That's why you're so careful in getting everything prepared. All right, so she's opened bag number 1, getting the 5 grams of rainbow ice out. She's putting it in the Ishin pot carefully. Let's set the timer here. Couple minutes, 20 seconds.
What is the brewing temperature for glass, please?
So generally speaking, for glass, there's not going to be a change in brewing temperature at all. It's brewing time. And for rainbow ice, you would need to brew for about 4 minutes. So you notice she's using a pot where she can control where the water is going in the pot, trying not to pour directly on the leaves. But don't worry if you do.
When this tea was first developed, how was it brewed? Was porcelain used? Or did they use clay pots?
So at that time, depends. When you say first developed, this is a complicated question, isn't it? Because we don't know the first day or first date it was developed. If it was mid-1500s, it is unlikely they were using a clay pot. More likely to have been using porcelain, not a pot either, a gaiwan. If it was later in the 1500s, they were equally likely to have been using an Ishin pot. By the 1600s, it was almost going to be majority brewed. So let's back up a minute, because I realize I've left you on an island without giving you context. So by context here, I'm talking about those within the growing area. Outside of the growing area, I don't know. You saw all sorts of different ways of brewing. But within the Wuyi Mountains, by the 1600s, the majority of people brewing were using Yixing pots, and they were using small Yixing pots, and they were developing the in quotes Kung Fu style. So Kung Fu style, by the way, and so this Kung Fu style was the first of the Kung Fu styles. In other words, this preceded the Chaozhou Kung Fu style. And the Chaozhou, which is in Canton province, has different rules than this, but it's an offshoot of this. This was first. And the primary rules were probably furthest promulgated by the monks at the various temples. And then tea literati picked them up quite quickly and started using it. Yes.
And would porcelain have even been around when this tea was first created? Was it
Yes.
around as an art? Okay.
Yes, porcelain was around when this was first created. Actually, Yixing clay has been around for a long time, but it wasn't, when this was first created, it was primarily used for storing water. And so the nature of the pots, and it wasn't pots, the containers that were created at that time was different. And then they realized that, oh my gosh, if we do it in this type of pot, an Yixing pot, we're going to get a different result.
One of the participants asked how much water to use when she's brewing.
Use 16 ounce, we use 16 ounces. But you could use anywhere from 12 ounces to 16 ounces. It's not going to matter. Not enough for you to worry about it. All right, so this is the color you're going to end up with. And remembering that this is done at 200 degrees, that means you have to be careful. You have to take a 200-degree inhalation. It's not even a sip. Now, some of you may be thinking, especially if you're new to this, that, hey, why don't we use the old-fashioned way of just blowing on it, and then we can take a sip? The reason that in Kung Fu tea in China that they don't do that is they realize that aroma appreciation and taste appreciation are interlocked. And if you blow away, in quotes, the steam, you also blow away the aroma, and you degrade your ability to get the full taste. And that's why inhalation or aspiration as you are sipping it is the key to understanding this tea. And at tea competitions in China, you see all of the judges when they're going through it. By the way, they have, well, actually, they use larger cups during the competition. We'll talk about that probably next week, because it's a whole different style of brewing than the small cup Kung Fu. It's also different than this large cup, but it's more like an 8-ounce cup. And we'll get into that because they're attempting to do something different during judging than you and I are with this. But we are making a judgment now. But we've already done the very important prejudgment to bring it here. And we've used the methodology that they use in China. So, and again, next week, we'll talk about that because it's very interesting. It's different than either the small cup or this cup. All right, so you see what this color is. This thing has aroma exuding all over the place from it. So even without really smelling it, I can smell it. Take a look at the leaves. Remember, this is very hot, so don't stick your nose all the way in because you could burn your nasal cavity. That's a very unpleasant experience. Right away, you get a sense of minerality, you get a sense of roast with this. You get a sense of other aromas that you're gonna tell me once you brew. So the first thing we're gonna do is enter the quality arena. Quality arena, we're looking for the following things. Where is the dryness on your tongue? Is there dryness? What aftertaste are you getting, if any? And what energetics? These three things on the first sip, inhalation, I should say. When you do a second inhalation, what you're looking for is, okay, I understand those three items. And maybe you don't understand the energetics yet. Energetics can come later, right? Because that's how your body feels in reaction to this. So don't worry if you tell me, Christ, I just inhaled the thing. I don't have any energetics yet. That's okay. You will have energetics. Most people will have energetics as you consume more. All right. So very carefully, 200-degree inhalation. Let it drift around on your tongue and in your mouth for a minute. Appreciate where the dryness is. Appreciate if you detect an aftertaste, and be aware energetics are to follow. You can do a second inhalation to verify the first, but I'm going to do a second inhalation for a different reason. I am now beginning to look at aroma and flavor and all the aspects related to flavor. And I'm beginning to make a judgment about that. By the way, take good notes as you're doing this, because next week we have another cliff tea. So as you take good notes, every time you do a cliff tea, you'll have a standard to compare against. All right, I've made my judgments. Tea Master is gonna brew with you at some point, very soon. She's getting clean cup. Oh, thank you. All right, and it's your turn to brew. So you notice she empties the pot, makes sure that all the leaves are out of there, because you don't want leaves that have been spent in any way. Why is that? Spent leaves will alter to some degree the flavor profile, and you won't get a true flavor profile if you leave leaves in there.
For people who are new to the broadcast, though, just a reminder, you can have a second steep from the same leaves.
Yes, yes, that's a great reminder. In fact, you should get a second steep, and the second steep will have some differences with the first steep, but it'll still be delicious. Heating up the clay pot. Remember, if you're using a ceramic, the timing for this steeping is 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And again, that all has to do with dissipation of heat. Glass dissipates heat the fastest, therefore you have to brew it considerably longer. Ceramic dissipates second fastest, and the clay actually concentrates the heat. Tea Master has ascertained that it's completely ready to go. Puts the 5 grams into the teapot. You are doing as well. You've set your timer for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. and you draw your water. This is 200-degree water. Okay, and again, Tea Master has it in a pot that she can control where the flow of the water is hitting in the I Ching pot. And all of these are details. Do details matter? In the aggregate, they matter a lot. If one detail or another detail you don't accomplish, don't worry about it. You'll still get a very good flavor. You get the best flavor if you can consider all the details in aggregate. You start the timer, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. All right. So we've talked about where this comes from. What about the process? Is this an easy process? Something that the farmer can kind of, just pick, like green tea, you pick, you wither maybe a little bit, you fry a lot, so you denature the oxidation enzyme. You might roll to shape it, and then you dry. That's what a green tea farmer does. And so pre-1500s, that's what they were doing at these farms. And actually, between the Tang Dynasty, 600, all the way into the Ming Dynasty, 1368, they were making green tea cakes. And we'll talk more about that next week also, because particularly in the Sung Dynasty, 960 to 1279 or so, they were chipping away those cakes and making what today you would call matcha. So again, reminding everybody thinks that matcha is a Japanese invention. No, not at all. This was a Chinese invention that the Buddhist monks took back to Japan. They perfected it in Japan. The Chinese left it. They went away from it. Yes.
Well, the participant says the warmed leaves were very fruity on the nose, like mixed berries, sweet notes that were sharper than the tartness. This participant says she also detected a deeper minerality than usual from the clipped teas, as well as deeper roast.
Okay, and I assume these are all from the leaves?
Yes.
Okay.
From the warm leaves.
From the warm leaves. Great commentary. So initially, hints of fruit. Without question, great cliff tea should have, by and large, although there's a few exceptions to this by varietal, hints of fruit or hints of floral. The commentator also noted hints of minerality, hints of roast. And these are all things that are logical for cliff teas because they are roasted. And this particular one is a heavy medium roast. What do I mean by that? What that really means, you can have light roast cliff teas. There aren't very many. Most of them are medium to heavy roast. This is a heavy medium roast.
What vintage is this particular tea?
Rainbow Ice. There are the Ibaniana? Ibaijo. Okay, 2018. So the questioner asked, when did we get this in the shop? And we believe we remember it was 2018. If it wasn't 2018, it was 2019. Yes.
Another participant says when she smelled the leaves in the bag, she could immediately detect hints of chocolate. The heated leaves gave a lot of minerality then after that, and then the wet leaves had this floral scent and strong minerality. So
from chocolate with the dry leaves to minerality with wet leaves, all the way to floralness as the leaves were fully soaked. And love that progression because your best cliff teas frequently, not always, but frequently, especially if it's a mid roast, medium roast, have slight hints of chocolate to them. They almost always have some sort of fruity slash floral. And why am I hedging my bets here? Because remember, the palate for Americans, actually for other peoples as well, even in China, there is this not confusion, but there's this differentiation. There really is a difference between fruity and floral, but they're so close that some people will say fruity when maybe the Chinese might say floral, and vice versa. And that's why I never, ever object to the mixing of those two, because they're that close. Yeah.
Another participant comments that she gets a very sweet, fresh aroma from the dry leaves.
Sweet, fresh aroma from the dry leaves. And I assume this means the heated dry leaves. And that's really a fair comment. Because cliff teas, you usually don't hear people describe because they don't have enough experience with cliff teas. Sweet, caramelly, but it's there. And if you know to look for it, you detect it. And then as you drink through the cup, so let's back up a minute. Is the opening round flavor going to be the same flavor you tell me in 5 minutes? The answer is no, it varies. Why? It's too hot in the beginning for you to get full appreciation on your tongue. As it cools, you start to involve more of your taste buds. You start to take bigger sips. You get full appreciation. Yes.
Another participant says he loves the sweet buttered caramel scent of the tea liquor.
This participant calls out the sweet buttered caramel scent or taste? Scent of the tea liquor. And that's one of my favorite aspects of Rainbow Ice, because right away it gives you an aroma. The liquor gives you an aroma. And that's what I was smelling when I was standing here. And actually my mouth was watering before I even had a chance to taste it, because that smell smelt so good. And it does have a sweetness and it does have a carameliness to it. Yeah.
Another participant says there's a subtle sweetness in the tea liquor, some roastedness, very round, full mouth sweetness.
Love this comment. Full round mouthfeel to this tea. Hints of sweetness in this tea. What was it? Oh, and
Subtle sweetness, some roastedness.
Some roastedness. And you notice this commentator didn't say huge amount of minerality. There isn't a huge amount of mineral. There is some or a bit, but really it's the roundness of this that makes this so spectacular. And again, when you do cliff teas that are out of the mountain, do you get this complexity? The answer is no, you do not. Not only do you not get this complexity, they won't stand up to time. And you don't get that mouth fullness, and you don't get that mellowness. Instead, you get uneven and usually some sharpness to the tea liquor. You don't with this. Yes.
Another participant notes it's very drying on the top of her tongue.
Ah, extremely good call out. For me, let me not talk about me. The participant says drying on the front,
Top.
oh, the top of the mouth. For me, now it's my me. For me, drying in the middle of the tongue. And again, it does not matter where it's drying for you. It's important that it's drying, but it doesn't matter because genomically we're all different. So my expectation, oh yeah, for me, some of you are gonna say on the side or on the back or on the very tip, it's different and that's okay. Yes. Okay. The smell is incredible, isn't it? Huge. So this is prototypical of great cliff tea because everything about this is huge in terms of aroma. But in terms of taste, it's extremely balanced. And it's extremely round, as one of you said. There aren't crags and uneven spots in this. This is very easy to drink. And again, bad cliff tea, perish the thought, is uneven and doesn't hold its ability to age. So one of you asked what the vintage of this was. And that's a great question because it suggests another question. Can we buy this and hold on to it for a certain amount of time and have even more mellow? And the answer is yes. Cliff tea can be safely bought and stored for at least 10 years. Typically, we think of cliff tea as preserving and getting better over a 20-year period. Now, you have some in China who preserve for even longer. We've had cliff tea that's 30 years old, and we haven't enjoyed it the same way that we've enjoyed 20-year-old cliff teas. But just to give you, and what was the difference? The main difference was that the 30-year-old cliff tea introduced an element of earthiness, which did not remind us of a cliff tea profile. And that's why we didn't enjoy it as much. Yes.
Two comments. One of the participants says, this tea gives me visions of victory.
Ah, for this participant, visions of victory. We need to do a perception check on that. Next comment.
Next comment, overall impression is of smoothness, but also given this other commenter, getting her ready to go to victory like Rob.
Getting ready to go. Ah,
Getting her
okay.
ready to go to
Go
victory.
to victory. And the initial part of that was smoothness, right? Yeah, yeah. Love both of these comments because this is a tea that makes you feel, it energizes you in a way. And both of you, by talking about getting ready for victory, you're energized. And great cliff teas do that. They energize you. And this is no exception. All right. Next week, let's see how I'm doing. Next week, we'll delve even more deeply in the processing. I don't really want to get started on that too much today. And the reason being, if I get started on it, we'll be talking about this for another 30 minutes. And we're doing a cliff tea next week, so it'll be easy to talk about the processing, and we'll start right off with that. And next week, we'll also again talk about when they have contests for cliff tea, how do they prepare? Because it is different than how you prepare it small cup and how you prepare for large cup. And also next week, we'll talk slightly about small cup preparation as opposed to large cup, because again, there is a distinct difference. It's counterintuitive. These are the type of issues that most Westerners get confused by. And they're mostly confused because the world famous authorities, both of them, have some problems, perhaps, in their explanations. Authority number one, the internet. New famous authority, ChatGPT. All right. Anything else?
No.
Okay. So the last thing I'm going to talk about here is in China. Is it just expensive here to get this tea, or is it expensive in China? And the answer is it's very expensive in China. And we pay essentially the same prices to get the tea. And we charge the same type of prices that people in China would be charged. We get the tea earlier than most Chinese do, because as soon as this tea is prepared and ready, and by the way, we'll talk in detail about this, but it's usually not ready till the end of August, start of September. They send it to us right away. Traditionally in China, tea that is finished processing is put in storage for about 5 to 6 months. They usually wait until Chinese New Year's the following year and then put it to market. These days, because just like here, no self-control, in a hurry, want what we want, they do put it on, some places actually put it on market a little bit earlier. The other thing we'll talk about, which is really, really important next week, is the difference that's beginning to develop between what you have here, which is handcrafted, versus this new wave. And we started this discussion maybe a month and a half ago when we were talking about other teas, versus standardization. And again, standardization means that you're going to get roughly the same flavor year in and year out. You will never get the same flavor by varietal year in and year out if you're doing crafting. The teas in the Wuyi Mountains, especially from the best areas within the mountain, almost uniformly handcrafted. There is this push to try and standardize, and especially younger processors are moving to try and standardize. And there's several reasons, again, try and get it on the market faster, right? Try and develop expectations that can be met every year. That's not what we do here. What we do here is handicraft, and we want those differences year by year. We want to sit in judgment as the samples come in and say, hey, this one is better than last year, or this one doesn't make the cut this year because it just doesn't measure up. That's what we want. And you as a consumer should want that too, because it's the individuality of the varietal reacting to the terroir, the geographic, and to the weather that changes year by year.
Any food that you would serve this particular Wulong with?
So food pairing. Now this can stand up to pretty much anything, can't it? So the one thing I wouldn't do is so if you were going to serve this near lunchtime or near dinner time, and you could serve this near either of them because this is lower caffeine. So I would do it after. I would do it with dessert. And I do it with any dessert except ice cream. I would not do it with a cold dessert. I would not pair it up with that. If you brought a nice cheesecake to room temperature, that could be very pleasant with this. Yes.
Why the name Rainbow Ice?
Why in the world? Great question. Questioner asked, why in the world is this called rainbow ice? I don't see any ice in this. I don't even see any rainbow in this.
Rainbow flavor, perhaps?
Hey, there we go. The producer of this show has nailed it on the head. A rainbow of flavor. The ice portion has to do with a phenomena I once saw actually in Yosemite, where I looked at a portion of a glacier when Yosemite used to have glaciers. And the sun was hitting it just right, so you had a rainbow effect. And it was kind of a balanced rainbow effect. And it just made me think the beauty of that. And almost the craftedness of that, because it wasn't the whole glacier, it was just one little part where the sunlight was hitting. And I'm sure the next day the sunlight hit that same part and it wasn't that way. And so, and all of you know me, yeah, I can't control my imagination, and hence the name Rainbow Ice. You all have been wonderful today, and you've had great commentary about this. I cannot wait until next week. Next week, we all get a chance for enlightenment. In the meantime, your responsibilities this week, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week. You all take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.